So this presentation will go over how climate change affects landscape, both globally and regionally. Climate change impacts landscapes on global scale. So global scale, we're talking about affecting the overall landscapes of the earth. We always immediately think about global warming and how the earth itself is actually warming, and that is a huge effect. And one thing that is changing because of the greenhouse gases is it's altering plant communities. And according to NASA, by 2100, half Earth's plant communities will be modified. And this is in response to the increase in temperature. What is happening is it's changing their ecosystems. So as the plant communities are modified, it will cause species to turn over and fight to survive. For plants to be able to survive, they must be evolutionarily and physiologically adapted to areas to survive, meaning they have to be able to reproduce to be able to continue living. So for some plants, that will actually cause them to die off. And the next thing we'll look at is, as I mentioned, the change in the ecological systems. And these are the changes to land systems only. About 40% of them by 2100 will be shifting. This will be a full shift in the major ecological system. So this would be like a forest, grasslands, tundra. So one could change into the other or vice versa. And this kind of ties into the altering plant communities because as the ecosystems change, it's going to cause the plants to have to adapt, evolve, or like I said before, die off. Not only will this affect the plants, it'll affect the animals and also humans. Will have to be able to adapt to the changing of the ecosystems. So now to look on still a large scale, but smaller than global, we're going to look at the regional scale. Climate change impacts on landscapes for Australia and Greenland. So looking at Australia, they're seeing an increase in heat, bushfires, longer fire seasons, droughts, and floods. In Greenland, you're seeing ice melt, raised water levels, decrease in Greenlandic dogs, and increased overall temperatures. So for Australia, I'm going to focus on the wildfires that they've had. So in 2019 and 2020, as most of us saw on news and media, Australia had the worst fire that the continent has faced. The burning lasted for a very long time, and it actually encompassed most of the island. This caused burning to the whole landscape. All plant life was burnt to the ground, many animals displaced or killed off because of the fire. This also led to increased pollution. So even after the fire was gone, it was hard for the just atmosphere of breathing. It affects the way that plants that did survive grow, the air that animals breathe, the contamination of water, and even humans, because the air quality was so bad. The fires also, the fire season is something Australia has experienced in the past. They actually have a fire season, but now fire seasons are longer. They're more destructive, and the fires have actually reached the wet forest, which before fires would not penetrate. And as these fires burn longer and are more destructive, and they actually destroy more wildlife. And it takes longer for that wildlife, plant life, to come back. So it is definitely having a very negative effect on the continent of Australia with the increase in fires. Now to look at Greenland. Again, global warming is causing it to be warmer there. Overall, the global temperature has increased 1.1 degrees for the Earth, so it's definitely having effects on areas with ice. And of course, Greenland has lots of glaciers. Um, the once covered lands, once ice covered lands, without ice or snow, or they're with significantly less. The glaciers are melting, and the snow is changing. In a NBC News article, the residents there of Greenland speak about how the ice is now soft and wet when it used to be hard. And what that does is, with the snow being soft now, it inhibits the use of dog sleds. And Greenland does not have a very large population. They have about 55,000 people living there, and dog sleds were a major source of transportation. And that transportation is harder to use as the ice melts off and the snow gets softer. Um, Also, the ways of livelihood in some areas have lessened as ice melts. It's the polar bears and seals aren't around as much, and that is what the Greenlandic people would hunt. And also, it's decreased ice fishing. But in a change of events in West Greenland, the melting of the glaciers has actually created a rise in the river, creating new waterways. And this has actually created new fishing and tourists for this area. And it has created wealth for the towns that are actually near the new waterways. So the melting glaciers don't always have such a negative effect. It's kind of a give and take here in Greenland. So overall, the climate change and how it affects the landscape, something from global to regional that is very apparent is that the greenhouse effect is causing the temperature to rise all over. I picked two different areas, Greenland and Australia, which are two completely different types of landscapes, ecosystems, populations, different parts of the world, and they're both being affected by that rise in temperature. Greenland is losing their glaciers, they're melting off. In some cases, it's causing hardships and ways of life to diminish. But on the flip side, in Western Greenland, we're actually seeing an uptick in the wealth there because the water is creating new vibrance to that area and new fishing and tourist opportunities. In Australia, the not bringing anything but demise. Some areas that the fires have touched, yes, life will come back again, but it does create with the intensity a harder thing to overcome for all of that ecosystem.